Hey friend, welcome back to Hey Wait. Let me start with a couple questions for you. Have you ever felt like you experienced the world a little more intensely than the people around you? Maybe feedback at work lingers with you for days. Maybe certain environments leave you completely drained, or you notice yourself getting overwhelmed at work or shrinking around people who you perceive as having more power than you. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know I talk a lot about the nervous system. And recently I've been sharing in particular about the fawn response, that tendency to over accommodate, people please, or shape yourself around other people in order to keep the peace. And sometimes those patterns really are learned survival strategies like they are in the fawn response. But today I want to talk about something that can shape those same kind of experiences that isn't a stress response at all. It's actually a temperament trait. Today's episode is about what it means to be a highly sensitive person, or an HSP. And I'm joined by Muriel Kosovsky, a business owner, coach, and author who specializes in leadership development with a particular focus on supporting highly sensitive leaders navigating the workplace. Muriel was born and raised in Paris and has worked internationally for more than 2 decades as a teacher, teacher trainer, senior leader, coach, and mentor across France, Morocco, Scotland, and England. She speaks 4 languages and thrives in multicultural environments. And she's also a dedicated equestrian who competes in dressage with her horse, Lunar. But the heart of her work, and what makes this conversation so meaningful, is Muriel's lived experience learning how to navigate the world as a highly sensitive person herself. In this episode, we talk about how to recognize if you or someone you love might be an HSP and the different layers of sensitivity you might experience. Muriel also shares the biggest challenges HSPs face at work, the non-negotiable qualities that make relationships sustainable and healthy for sensitive people, and the core quality that thriving HSPs tend to organize their lives around. Whether you identify as highly sensitive or not, this conversation is really about learning to say, hey, wait, and to pause to make space for your own experience so you can discover what actually helps you thrive rather than burning out or getting in your own way again and again and again. Welcome, Muriel. It's good to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
You know, I think we met, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, when you invited me on your podcast, The Highly Sensitive Leader. Is that the right
Yeah,
timing?
yeah, I think so. I think
Okay.
it was probably about 2022, 2023. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well.
yeah,
And you invited me on to talk about nervous system regulation for people who are highly sensitive. And I don't know if you remember this, but the day, so I knew I'd heard about highly sensitive people. I was familiar with the term. I'd never identified with it necessarily. The day before you interviewed me, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a online quiz to
yeah,
see. And I don't know how accurate they are, but I took this online quiz to see
yeah,
if I was a highly sensitive person. I scored 95 out of 100.
yeah.
And that was like definitely a hey wait moment for me because I'm like, hey wait, what? I'm highly sensitive. And I left my office in the house and I walked out to the kitchen where my husband was and I was like, hey, I just took this quiz and it turns out I'm a highly sensitive person. And in this really loving, non-shitty way, Mr. Moon was like, yeah, no shit. And it was one of those things where I was like, how did I get to be 42, 43 years old and not have embraced or acknowledged that aspect of me? So I'm curious in telling you that story. I'm curious when you found out that you
Yes,
were highly sensitive and what that was like for you.
yeah. So it was an experience as well. So I was about 25, so I was younger-ish in terms of.
Yeah.
I think I was quite lucky to find out at that point because otherwise, all the work I've done from then until now would not have
Yeah.
happened. Um, so I was. I remember I was still living with my parents at the time, and I was for the millionth time upset and
Mm,
probably crying, about something or other. And I was just fed up with being
mm,
upset. And I was fed up with all the time feeling like I was always like raw and, sensitive to everything. And, just like that. I was just like really, really fed up with it. Like I I want to stop being like that. um, because at the time, the context of this is I was experiencing really quite serious mental health issues, um, depression being the main one. um,
Hmm.
i was I was just in a context where mentally, emotionally, I was hypersensitive to everything that was happening around me, all the relationships, everything. And I Googled, what did I Google? Just put a very, and it was, mind you, it was not the start of Google, but we were not,
Yeah,
it
this
was
is,
quite a while ago. So it was kind of the
yeah,
beginnings of like being able to like type things in a computer and
sure.
kind of find stuff out. Um, and I typed, I think I just entered being sensitive to everything or something like that. Um, and the HSP trait came up.
Hmm.
And I remember I started reading the answers, and again, it was not, maybe not as, they didn't have AI, things like that like today, but I it came up, and I was like, oh, this is a thing. It's been identified
I'm not the
as,
only weirdo.
yeah, I'm not the only weirdo. It's been identified as, a thing and a trait, and and then obviously I got to
Yeah.
read more, and so I found out at that point, about like mid 20s, and I actually didn't really pay that much attention to it at the time. I was like, oh yeah, good to know.
Hmm.
Things starting to kind of fall into place.
Hmm.
Um, and I really, really started paying attention to it and starting the work probably in my early 30s, like late 20s, early 30s, when
Hmm.
I made a decision to leave my home country and move to a different country and completely change. Like, I just had a massive change in my life, and I just decided that I'm just gonna sell my house and my car and resign
Wow.
from my job and pack up my things and go to Morocco in North Africa,
Oh, wow.
um, where my cousin was living at the time. Um, and yeah, I just like, and it was, again, still today the best decision I've ever made, because it's allowed me
How?
to open um, a life path that kind of got me
Hmm.
out of the, progressively, not from one day to the next, but it was the start of a new lease of life for me. And
And was that when you started coaching specifically highly sensitive people?
um not really. I mean, all this was so I was 29 years old when I left France, as it were.
Hmm.
And I only started, well, I started coaching in actually 2008, really proper, like full time, and doing my coaching certification. Before that, I did a lot of mentoring, training, mentoring, all that. I was always in that space of developing people, but I really focused on highly sensitive people when I started coaching full time from 2008. Um, but yeah, so I found out when I was about 25. Then it took me a few years to kind of really start to really pay attention to that,
Hmm.
and start to integrate and develop strategies, in my work, in my life, to kind of, yeah, to navigate my sensitivity, and that
Yeah.
included therapy. I
Hmm.
went through therapy for a year and a half weekly, so
Hmm.
that's a lot of
For the first
sessions.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at that time, at
Got
that
it.
time. So it's been a combination of things, but I think I was in a way lucky to have found out fairly early on in life, because I also have clients and people coming, kind of coming into my community, and getting familiar with my work, who are, you said about 42, but some people are 50, 55,
Yeah.
60, 70, people who are really late in life and are just now like, oh gosh, it's a thing.
It's the
So,
thing. So
but yeah, good.
oh, what changed for you once you knew? I mean, I know you said it took you a few years to integrate
Yeah.
it, but once you were integrating, what was different for you?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, when I found that, just reading that on the screen was already straight away a form of relief, a
Mm.
form of, oh, Okay.
There's something like there's
A
nothing wrong
click,
with you.
like
This is a way
something.
of being.
Yeah, something clicked in my mind that it was a thing. It was, again, as you said, there's an explanation behind my behavior and the
Mm,
way I experience the world. So that form of almost like a validation. And I think
hmm
that's what a lot of my clients experience when they come in, and
hmm
we maybe they come in not even thinking, just for kind of some sort of leadership coaching, or they're exposed to me, they just matched with me, paired with me sometimes, and we find out that they're highly sensitive. And I think it's just that sense of, oh, that sense of, I don't know, that I suppose that validation, that that
Sure.
explains X explains Y
Yes.
type of thing.
Yes.
And I think
Right.
for
And our
me,
nervous systems love that. Like our nervous systems love making sense to ourselves. So
yes,
that alone, you use the word relief. Like
yeah,
there is a sense of relief when there's coherence in your
yes,
experience.
yes, yes. And then I think when I really started paying attention to my HSP trait, for example, in my work, one of the things that I remember clearly was the sense of overwhelm.
Mhm.
So bearing in mind that at the time I was teaching in the secondary school environment. So
Oh, good
I
Lord.
don't know an environment that could be more stimulating than that.
Oh
I
my
was
God.
interacting with, like, I counted at some point, and I think I had like over 1,000 interactions a day. Like, it was
No,
just ridiculous. It's just
no,
ridiculous, like
no,
the
thank
amount
you.
of stimulation you. I don't know how I did it for like 15 years,
No.
but I did. Um, and so I started developing strategies to reduce the amount of physical and cognitive overwhelm that I was experiencing pretty much every day. And I remember one of the little strategies that I had is that at the end of each, and I don't know how I don't know if you know how it works, but here in the UK, you might be teaching 5, 6, 7 lessons back, not back to back exactly, but not with not enough time to for your nervous system
Regroup.
to kind of
Yeah.
come down. And so I remember, and I called it like the blanket system. Like, there was something about having a blanket, like that little buffer. So I put at the end of each of my lessons, I actually asked students to pack like 3 or 4 minutes early. I wasn't supposed to do that, but I did.
I'm sure
Uh,
they love that though.
and I said, guys, we're gonna start packing up. Get ready to go. So they love that, and then so they're lining up behind the door, and when the bell rings, like boom, they just come out, and that helped. That allowed me to have at least like a few minutes to kind of sit down and take a breath and bring myself down. So it's kind of those things where I was really aware of how overwhelmed I was all of the time, and I started to say, okay, now
Yeah.
I need to do something about this, because I know where it's coming from. I know how my nervous system works. And so this I suppose the understanding of the HSP trait has allowed me to put things into place and strategy to one, feel better. And then
hmm
once I was able to regulate myself better, then you go from survive to feel better to then thrive.
Right.
That's the trajectory. So yeah.
Because you understand what you need to thrive as opposed to just trying to keep your head above water.
Yes.
Let me ask you, for the person listening who hasn't heard of highly sensitive person, HSP, how might they know, like what kind of traits might they or someone they love have that they could recognize, oh, this is kind of part of the patterning or the traits?
Yeah, yeah. So I think a useful way to think about the HSP trait is the idea of stimulation. So, and the way I explain this to people is I talk about the 4 levels. So there's the physical level, the emotional level, the cognitive level, so the thinking aspect,
hmm
and then the energetic level. So
hmm
usually, a highly sensitive person will have a combination of sensitivity in those 4 areas. And some people might have more physical sensitivity. So that will be, the stimulation to light and sounds, bodily sensations such as hunger, thirst, cold, hot, things like that. So that there could be sensitivity on that level. So generally, it's experiencing something in a very intense way. So, for example, when I get hungry, I have to eat. It's not like, oh,
Same.
we'll have lunch in an hour. No, I go
Mm-mm.
and I get some fruit or I get a snack because this is now. This is happening now. So, this it's all very intense. Emotionally, that's usually how it unfolds the most for HSPs. It's experiencing very intense emotions, very intense emotional reactions to events, to what people say, to what people do, to what happens to you. So, any emotion really. But the emotions that keep coming back a lot are worry, frustration, just generally feeling a little bit negative about things or feeling a bit overwhelmed about things. So these are the emotional side. And equally, it could be very joy could be very intense and very overwhelming. So it's not necessarily negative emotions, it's kind of experiencing emotions in a very intense way a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the time, which needs to be regulated. So it's part of the work that I do with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
The cognitive aspect is often around overthinking. I put it simply, but it's often that, and that's what people describe to me is just
Yes.
having an amount, like an insane amount of thoughts and ideas coming
Yes.
to your head, and you don't know what to do with that. It's like a dump, and you're like, oh gosh, like how. And I was reviewing. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about my upcoming book, but I was editing
Yes.
some of the stuff today, and there was this passage about thoughts and about how HSPs usually experience a higher amount of thoughts than averagely sensitive people, which the ordinary person already experiences a huge amount anyway, like 60,000 or something like that. I think the HSP is more in the 70, 80,000. And I think it's about just the overwhelm that comes from that, and the
Mm-hmm.
cognitive overstimulation. And finally,
Mm-hmm.
the energetic level is just the peak and troughs in energy. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the roller coaster. I call it the roller coaster of energy that a lot of HSPs describe. Is you might be super energized for a day and then do more than you should, and then the next day you completely exhausted, and you can't do anything. And even during the day you might have peaks and troughs. And so looking after your energy levels, sleep is extremely important for HSPs, and it goes back to to the nervous system as well, and how to sleep is also a major tool for regulating the nervous system. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I appreciate that you mentioned the nervous system because this is the way to address this, right?
Yeah.
Through the nervous system and embodied work. And yet, I think it's really important to mention this is not like, this isn't a survival response. This isn't like a fawn response where you feel overwhelmed, or this is a this is a personality trait.
Mm.
Like this is
Yeah.
what we were born with. This is how
Yes.
we're wired.
Yes.
It's not it's not something that's like a response to something. It's just
No.
right. Am I
Yes.
correct in
No,
that?
you're correct, and it's a defined as a neurophysiological trait.
Okay.
So it is about how your nervous system is wired, how your brain is wired. So yeah, it's first and foremost a trait, really a trait of the body, and it's how
Yeah.
your the stimulation comes through your five senses, and how your senses pick up on things and details a lot more than the average sensitivity. So, for example, if and Dr. Elaine Aron, that we might reference, is the
Yes.
person that coined the acronym HSP. And in her book, The Highly Sensitive Person, which is the first book she wrote around this, she was talking about, like, if you look at you're highly sensitive and you look at an orange, or you might see, look at the shape and the texture, and slightly more orange on that side and less orange on that side. And she was saying that a highly sensitive person, a normal person, sorry, that's not the wrong word, an averagely sensitive person
There
might,
is no normal person.
yeah, exactly, might say, oh, might distinguish between two or three sorts of orange, but we see 12 different sorts.
Mhm.
It's kind of
Mhm.
this idea of everything is more dissected and more detailed, We take
Mm.
in all of that, all of this information, we absorb that, and we, not to talk about what we absorb from other people, so that's another dimension. Yeah. So
The thing that I want to say is um, the reason why I didn't suspect that I was an HSP was because at, I loved adventure and I loved big experiences and I loved riding motorcycles. And I know for you, you love horses.
yeah.
And it wasn't until after I took the test that I learned there was something called high sensation seeking HSP.
Yeah.
And would you identify
Yeah.
as that as well?
Yeah.
So because this blew my mind. Like HSP made
Yeah.
sense to me, but this part was like, what?
Yeah.
So can you explain that piece?
Yeah, that piece. So that piece is really interesting because, and you know, a lot of the time I, when I have new clients coming in, and that in my corporate work that I'm paired with, I often talk about that, and I talk about what I bring to the coaching, and I bring the definitely the highly sensitive side of things, but I do tell them that I also bring the. No, I don't phrase it this way like high sensation seeker, but I say, I love horse riding and I love exploring and I love competing and I love challenging myself, getting myself out of my comfort zone. So, and I said to them, this is a really interesting thing to be experiencing every day. I'm highly sensitive and also I love getting myself out of my comfort zone. And then I need to manage myself within that. So yeah, so it's kind of what I just said. I think the high sensation seeking HSP will be someone who loves exploring, who's extremely curious. Curiosity, I think, is at the heart
Mm,
of all of that. Extremely curious about the world in general, about exploring. So usually loving traveling and maybe learning languages or
or they
anything that
move a
is,
lot.
yeah, moving, maybe
Yeah.
from city to city, or just moving for the sake of moving house. Um, exploring other cultures, that particularly cultures that feel quite foreign, that feel very
Yeah.
different from where they, maybe the context they were born in.
Hmm.
It could touch also on, the form sorts of entertainments or hobbies that you are
Mm.
seeking, usually kind of high sensation. It doesn't have to be like bungee jumping or, something really like base jump, something really extreme. But as you said, motorcycling, horse riding, all these sorts of things that would involve a degree of, yeah, a degree of challenge, a degree, maybe
Fear.
danger is a strong word, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that where you have to consider a safety.
Yes.
So things like that. For some people, it could be, particularly when they're younger, exploring maybe a little bit, drugs, things like that. It could be
Yeah.
that form, but not necessarily. But it could be different shapes or form. But it's usually this idea of exploration, adventure, curiosity, pushing the boundaries, which is a really interesting combination with being highly sensitive.
Yeah. In your research, is there a connection of why that combination exists?
I don't know. I think that for me, it kind of makes sense, and it's not every HSP that is high sensation seeker. I think the research to date, not my research, but the research that's been carried out, suggests that probably 25-30% of HSP are high sensation seeking. So it's not, everyone within that kind of group. But I think for me, it makes sense that, so, for example, being an HSP, if we just think about your five senses, and the fact that, for example, as an HSP, when you look at a beautiful sunset, what you have access to in terms of, your experience looking at something beautiful. So whether it's a sunset or a painting or, work of art, because you're experiencing everything intensely, and in a way, it's extremely rewarding.
Hmm.
So it makes sense
Yeah.
that you would want more of that, that you
Mm.
would want more of that sensation that you might find in something that is exhilarating for you.
Hmm.
So for me, it
Right.
makes
Something that's
sense.
pleasing. You want
Something
to
that's
intensify
pleasing.
it.
So I think the exploration and the adventure is just a way to actually stimulate your senses,
Yeah.
because you know that your senses are, or intuitively, you know that your senses are extremely responsive. So for
Right.
me, it makes sense. in my head, I'm like, yeah, this is why wanted, I've always been seeking adventure and learned, you know, my languages and traveled, is because for
Hmm.
me, it's rewarding. It's something that exhilaration for me is rewarding because my senses
Hmm.
are always on high alert and picking up on things. So it's, in a way, it's just what I do.
Same.
It
Yeah.
makes sense. For me, it makes sense. But equally, I think, as an HSP, it can be challenging to navigate that sensitivity. And I think if you're not high sensation seeking and you're naturally kind of wanting to push those boundaries, you know, it might be actually more difficult, because I think
Hmm.
if I didn't have my high sensation seeking side, for me that was almost my saving grace in a lot of ways, because then it pushed me outside of where I was and where I lived, and it pushed me to
Mm.
explore other things, which led me to be able to develop myself in different ways.
You're
I think
right.
if I didn't have that, I don't know where I would be today.
I would agree. I would agree. And the question that comes to mind as you say that is, I think of your work that I've followed, and you talk a lot about driven people and ambitious people,
Yes.
particularly HSP people.
Yeah.
So I'm curious: is driven and ambitious typically a trait of an HSP, and or is it a trait of a high sensation seeking HSP, or
Yeah.
both?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's a good question. I think that I see ambition and drive in a lot of HSPs generally. And I think that comes from the fact that, again, that kind of cognitive sensitivity where, you know, the, the HSP generally generates a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts that sometimes, we have to kind of sift through, a bit of the garbage and think, okay, well, what do I want to keep within that? But I think there's also the creativity that comes a lot, and a lot of
Hmm.
the time the artistry, and the fact that that sensitivity, that I think that sensitivity does trigger a lot of, it is really why the ambition is here often.
And as you say that in my body, what makes sense to me is that being that alive to the world around you is a fuel.
Yes,
It can
exactly.
be overwhelming, but it can also just really enliven you and make you want to go in six directions or go as far as you can
Yeah,
in this direction.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's what often happens, and I think it happens sometimes to the degree where people don't have the tools to regulate that. And
So this is why it's so important to have
yes,
support.
yes, to have support, to learn, yes, to learn how to regulate your sensitivity, because otherwise what starts as a gift, maybe, of, as you said, wanting to drive
Hmm.
something as far as you can, then it turns into perfectionism, or
Hmm.
trying to achieve impossible standards, which in turns makes you become, a little bit frustrated all the time, and say, oh no, I'm not going to do this because I'm not going to do it to the standards that I think I should meet.
Ah,
So it
right.
becomes
And
then,
I feel that hitting the emotional level, right? And then you get overwhelmed emotionally, and then you get overwhelmed energetically, and then you can kind of get in your own way.
yeah, you get in your own way for sure,
Yeah.
when you're not regulated, in my experience.
Yeah.
So,
How do you see, um, let me say that a different way. What challenges do highly sensitive people face in relationships?
so
She's like, here we go.
here we go. So I think I'd like to start with the professional relationships, because I think it's a
Great.
great terrain for us to understand what happens. And what I see with my clients happen is that, particularly with our relationship, potentially with kind of, so sorry, let me backtrack. I think there's something with HSP with almost like hierarchy in general.
Hmm.
that could be a little bit like comes as a little bit of a challenge. So, and
I'm like, you don't say.
you don't say. So I don't know. I mean, it's not like rejecting the hierarchy for the sake of doing that. It's more like, I think, the idea of feeling either under pressure or feeling judged or feeling like you constantly have to prove yourself, seeking that form of validation. Because the thing with
Hmm.
most HSPs that I've worked with and that I know, a key word that keeps coming back is the idea of harmony.
Hmm.
And so I think that a lot of HSPs actually in relationship, whether it's professional or more personal romantic relationships, are looking for some form of harmony, some form of alignment. And I think that in the professional world, the status and the hierarchy that is naturally there, and it's there for a reason. It's there because that's how it allows people to work together, um, is often yeah, like people like HSPs experience difficulties around that because
Hmm.
then there's this idea of this person is more and I'm less, so I'm more and this person is less, and just finding this
Ah.
alignment and this harmony, I think it's more difficult. So for me personally, I find that the challenge that I've had a lot um, in my professional life has been to feel like there wasn't quite an alignment with, particularly if the people were quote unquote above me. I found it difficult to position myself and to be confident in my
Hmm.
positioning. So either I saw them as I put them on a pedestal and it was like I I don't know, valued them or something like that,
Hmm.
or I was thinking they were not good enough, or and I kind of undervalued them. Um,
Hmm.
so yes, I think the positioning towards hierarchy, I think, is something that I see fairly often, that I've experienced myself, and I think the
And
sensitivity comes with also. So that's not exactly a relationship, but it's related. Is the
it,
the
yeah.
ability to hear feedback
Uh,
and to process
because it's
feedback,
so
and usually your
intense.
feedback comes from your manager or the person who looks after your
Hmm.
performance. So it's not just the relationship itself or the person itself; it's all the things around it, like how this relationship then impacts us and our sensitivity.
Well, I hear you speaking a lot to the dynamic, like power
Yeah,
dynamics in relationships
yeah,
is what's challenging.
yeah.
So how would you work with someone around that? Do you tell them don't be go be an entrepreneur, work for yourself, or how do you work with people within
Well,
hierarchies like that?
no, that's a good question, and I think it's. I, often I don't tell them to go and be an entrepreneur because that's just not.
It's not
Well, if
it's not any
it's
easier.
like leave your job and then you can just do what you want.
Right.
So a lot of the time it doesn't. So they kind of in their role and they enjoy their role. Um, so for me, the way I approach this is more around improving communication, improving their ability to hear feedback and to process feedback, their ability
Hmm.
to be confident in the way they build relationships and be able to position themselves within the relationship. So I work a lot with an area of psychology called transactional analysis,
Mm.
which is an area of psychology that studies how we build relationship with people and how we position ourselves in relationships. It's extremely relevant to being HSP and how HSPs experience relationships. So I work a lot with those tools to help people confidently position themselves within the relationship, not thinking that they are less than or more than, but being just
Mm.
what they call figuratively is called being the adult. Because in
Yes.
transactional analysis, you've got the parent, the adult, and the child, and these are figurative. These are not like you are actually the child of your manager. But within the relationship, ideally you want to be in your adult zone where you are. you are confident with yourself, you position yourself in a way that you're not scared, you're not
Mm.
overpowering, you're kind of in that kind of balance state.
Hmm.
So I help them with these sorts of tools.
Mm.
But I think feedback is a big one, is a really big one, because
Yeah.
if you are able to hear constructive feedback and process it and use it, then that's half of the job done, really.
And is that the same in a personal relationship? I mean, I know we're not getting like performative feedback necessarily,
No.
but what the dynamics personally, is it a
Yeah.
similar
So
thing? You're seeking harmony?
yeah, and I think you know what? There's one thing that I think is common. I remember the manager that I probably have enjoyed the most working with. And to this day, I still reference her. She doesn't know that, but I reference her when I do like leadership trainings and things like that. And I think the one thing that she naturally, I think naturally, I don't know that she's worked on that or developed that, intentionally, but she was always extremely reassuring. Not reassuring as in overly reassuring, but she was not judging.
Mm.
She was accepting you as you are, accepting situations as they arise, always calm, but not judging you.
Mm.
Just seeking really
Hmm.
to look at the situation and help with no judgment. And I know that my current partner is like that. He doesn't judge, he's calm. If I present with a situation where maybe I'm challenged or I'm struggling a little bit, he never, ever, ever, ever judges me. And I
Mm.
think that that's the common point that I see between those two individuals. And I think this is why this relationship with this manager worked so well and why my relationship with my partner works so well. Because I
Yes,
never, at any moment, feel like I'm being judged. And my
that's
sensitivity is not
huge.
being judged.
Because I don't know if you're built the way I am on the inside, you're doing enough judging of yourself
Yeah.
for everybody
Yes.
involved. You don't need it from the outside. And I also, the other thing you said was he's calm. And I think that is so huge. My husband is the same. He's unflappable.
Yeah.
And because I feel things so deeply, to be around someone, it's not that he is unfeeling,
Yeah.
it's that he is calm.
Mm.
Yeah. And if I'm around someone who's just got, who can't control their energy or emotions, that's exhausting
Yeah.
and also scary for
Mm.
me. It's too much.
Yeah.
So I appreciate those two, like calm and non-judgmental is really, really huge
Mm.
for someone who's HSP.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And, for people who might be HSP listening to this and, thinking about dating or, whatever the
Yeah.
situation is, I think these for me will be the two really non-negotiables that I think will be really important to look
Yeah.
for, and sort of also red flags, because if you end up going on a date with someone who is like high speed, as you said, like it just feels too much, like don't do it, don't
Yeah.
don't go down that road because it's not
It's
gonna
not
work.
harmonious for you.
It's not harmony. Yes, harmony is
Yeah.
lost. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, so as someone you've now known about being HSP for over 20 years,
Yeah.
if I'm doing my math right,
Yeah.
what are the lessons that you're learning now after all this time and as a business owner and a
Yeah.
coach and a writer?
It's really interesting because I've got oh well, my number one lesson is that it's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
It's never, there's nowhere to get, there's no destination, and I know I will never be 100% regulated all the time. And I still
Hmm.
have moments where I feel overwhelmed, I feel frazzled, something upsets me, I have a trough in my energy, even with the maintenance and the how I look after myself, and I really try to be proactive. There will always be a learning lesson around the corner. And we joke about this with another business owner who is also HSP, and she's actually going to feature in one of the interviews in my book. And um, we always laugh because we're like, oh, I've done it again. And then
Again.
I've learned
Yeah,
it
totally.
again. And it's always like that
Yeah.
cycle of the again. And I think the again is just part of the journey where, maybe you're going to overbook yourself, or you're going to,
Yeah.
I don't know, like sign up for something that you shouldn't have signed up for. Or you're going to want to please someone. It's just kind of, yeah, it's always, I think that's my number one lesson, is that we always learn something new, and we learn it again, and we make a mistake again, and we learn again. And it's a little
Right.
bit of a
Because
cycle.
it's amazing for me how much I still in my mind think, well, this time will be different. Like, really?
Really?
Okay.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and
Um,
this is an interesting one because, just to finish on that, one of the sections in my book is about routines, and about using your routines as an anchor for remaining calm, and dealing with more challenging situations. Um, and I remember saying, at some point, that I fooled myself so many times when I dropped my routines. I don't really do it that much anymore, but there's been quite a few times in my life where I'm like, no, I don't need to do my breathing, and no, I don't need to do my whatever, was my routine at the time, and I fooled myself. I'll be fine. And guess what? I wasn't
Not so
fine.
much.
I wasn't fine. And
No.
maybe I was fine for a few days or even a few weeks, but long term, I can tell you that without your routines you will not be
Hmm.
fine. And don't fool
Hmm.
yourself that you will be, because you won't as an HSP. So yeah, it's a
So
huge thing.
true. So true. So you mentioned your book a couple times, and I'm
Yes.
really, really excited that this is coming out later this year.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people what it actually is?
Yes, yes. So this is and it's funny because at the weekend somebody asked me, who doesn't know my work at all, doesn't know what HSP means, and I had to explain what my book was, and I found it quite difficult. So I'm happy to do it now in the context where we've set the scene. Um, so and back in the last few years, I had a podcast which is now offline. So it's the Highly Sensitive Leader podcast, which I've invited you to, on. And so when I decided to stop the podcast, I had over 100 episodes fully written, as I'm an HSP and I'm very conscientious. Everything was written.
Yeah.
And so my idea was to kind of turn whole of this content that I thought was pretty good. Like, people were enjoying it and it made sense. And I thought, well, let me turn this into a book. So this is essentially what the book is a written version of my podcast. But what it is really, and especially, so there will be two books. In fact, the first book, well, it's all meant to be a blueprint for HSPs to learn how to first regulate themselves emotionally, cognitively, physically, energetically. So the first volume is more of a I won't say a foundational blueprint, with all of the key topics that we kind of touched on today around, body and energy and self care and routines, but also, emotional regulation, cognitive regulation, perfectionism, anxiety, worry, all the topics that
Hmm.
for HSPs, are like big ones. I kind of deal with all of that in that book, and it's kind of little sections digestible where I talk about my experience, my client's experience, and I give some tips and strategies so that people can kind of quickly apply some of these things. And the second volume will be more focused on really the professional world for HSPs. So workflows and self leadership, working with people, things like that. So that,
So good.
yeah. So,
Well, in person listening, the book is called HSPedia, as
yeah,
in Encyclopedia of
yeah.
HSP people, which I think is such a cool name. And
Thank
we'll
you.
put it in the show notes how you can. It won't be out until the end of the year, but you can get a preview of it
Yeah,
if you sign
so
up for.
yeah, so I've put together, it's a very simple Google form, that you can sign up for. Just give me your email, and then when the book is made available, then you'll be the first to know. But also in the meantime, I want to give people a little something. So when you sign up for the Google for the wait list, I call it the wait list.
Mhm.
You can get the introduction to the book. So it's not the full intro. So this book has a kind of an extended introduction, but you get the first, like, what you're going to read first, and
Mhm.
it's what I call the an extract from the introduction, which which I think is a really good read in terms of getting a feel for what this book will be about, and what is my philosophy behind this book as well, and behind my
Yeah.
work on myself as an HSP and the work that I do with people. And also, I send people an ebook that I've written about developing your confidence as a highly sensitive person. So, a nice read also to kind of get our minds around, as HSPs, and think about how we can start developing more confidence. Yeah, so I'm excited.
That's
People are starting to sign up, and yeah,
I've signed up.
yeah. So I'm really excited to be doing that, and and the book also will have like what I call real life stories. So
Mhm.
there will be people interviewing, which I think you might be one of them.
I think I might be.
Yes, about their experience of being HSP in relation to some of the topics.
Yeah.
So I've had the first interview a few weeks ago, and it's around the topic of self acceptance, which is absolutely
Mm.
key for HSPs.
Mhm.
And yeah, we had a first interview, and so at the end of the section, then there will be a kind of a little summary of the interview, and what was said, and what the real people, real HSPs, on their
Yeah.
journey are experiencing, and again sharing tips and strategies.
Such a great resource, and I'm so glad that you used all of the content that was in your podcast. 'Cause that was just in and of itself such a great resource, and to put it in a way that people can hold it, can gift
Yes,
it to someone, and say, "Hey,
yes,
this is what you will need to support," as you said earlier, thriving, not just surviving.
yes,
So I want to honor your time and know that, listener. I have to say, at the beginning, I asked her about, do you have a hard stop? And Muriel was so amazing and said, "I know I can have this much time before I start to not feel good and
yeah,
my brain gets foggy."
yeah,
And I was like, I love that you said that, because that is something I have to say to people, and it always feels kind of uncomfortable, but this is part of learning how to take care of yourself as an HSP. So I want to take care of you, taking care of you. And I have one last question, and that
yes,
is, I'm really curious to hear your answer to this, because I suspect this is something you have to have as part of your toolkit. Do you have a practice or a ritual or something that you do to help you stay with yourself when you're around other people?
yeah, yeah. So for me, and I'm gonna give an example of when I'm around people electronically. I don't know if electronically is the right
Oh,
term.
no, yeah, that's
So
sure.
what I'm referring to is how I interact with groups, for example, on WhatsApp, or
Oh, God.
interactions that might be triggering for me. So if it's a group, so typically at the moment for me, it's maybe on the family side of things, and yeah, so I won't go into details of that, but it's there are some interactions that I find very triggering, and some groups are just ongoing, 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 and so the way I deal with that, and the way I reconnect to myself, and I honor my needs, because if I'm reactive with those situations and those interactions, I get frazzled and I get overwhelmed, and I just keep reacting, and
Mm,
it's not good. It's not where I want to be. So now the practice is, I have a slot for this. I have a slot for this at lunchtime. And the reason why it's lunchtime is because the morning our cortisol levels are higher, and we more easily triggered in the morning. So I don't do it in the morning, because that's the recipe for
smart.
disaster. And in the evening, I don't wanna be triggered before my sleep. So it's
Yeah.
lunchtime. And so I've got 10 minutes at lunchtime where I do the interaction that I have to do. And then I shut it down for the rest of the day.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm
That feels
connected
so
to
good.
myself. Yeah.
So you've discovered the time of the day that works the best for you, that won't take from you
Yeah.
in these exchanges.
Yeah.
And you allow yourself to contain it and be boundaried around it.
Yeah.
I love that. And I'm imagining there is a person listening right now that also just took a deep breath and was like, oh, I could do that. I could do that.
Yeah.
I really do think that this episode is going to be really important for some people listening who might, like us, not have known until they were an adult. Like, hey, wait, this is a thing. I have, I'm wired this way. So I'm just so grateful to you, Muriel, for coming and speaking about your experience and speaking from your expertise on this. I think it's going to touch people.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Me too. Pleasure for me as well. Thank you so much, listener, for being here today. I hope something resonated with you and helps you to have a good experience of yourself in your life and your relationships, because you really do deserve that. And if someone came to mind while you were listening today, could you take a moment and share this episode with them right now? And if you haven't had a chance to yet, please leave a review for Hey Wait, because both of those things help new people find the show. And it means a lot to me to be able to reach and connect with new people around this work. With that, if you have an idea for a guest or a topic, or you have a question for me, feel free to reach out to me at Hey Wait with Jay on Instagram. Hey Wait is produced by Viv at First Click VA, and the original music is by Dalton Grant. And hey wait, before we go, I want you to remember, your insights matter, and the right people will meet you there. So stay with yourself. And I'll see you next time.